It seems to be a reoccurring theme, but it's a mess again. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. It's a few days after our last update with, well, we did the shop cleanup and kind of an overview on what was going on Michael's Mark III. So, a lot's been happening around the shop. We're getting parts in every day, and we've gotten a lot of accomplished on the car, but we took a giant step backwards on Sunday over the weekend. And I'll walk you over there and show you exactly what happened on Sunday. At the end of last week's video, or was it last week? Yeah, it was last week when I shot it. Anyway, we talked about taking the transmission out, and the transmission is indeed out now, but we ran into some complications. So let me take you over to the front side of the car, and we'll take a look and see where we're at with that. So, this transmission that is in the car, or now out of the car, is the Tremec 3650. And it came in, I believe, some of the Cobra, Mach 1, and I think they had one other model of Mustang in those years where this transmission was installed. And they're installed behind the dual overhead cam engine, I believe, which is what we have. The problem with it is it has an integrated bell housing, meaning the bell housing is actually the front cover of the transmission as well. So you can't just disconnect the transmission from the bell housing, which makes it exceedingly difficult, and as we found out, impossible to remove with the engine in the car. So after having disassembled the transmission from the engine, we found no other alternative than to pull the engine. And having the transmission separated from the transmission made things even more complicated, because once the transmission was held in place with the engine hoist, kind of like it is here, we had to figure out a way to hold the front of the transmission up in the air in the car so that we could use the shop crane around the front of the front of the car to pull the engine out. So it was quite a feat. We ended up chaining the front of the transmission up to one of the cross members, this cross member in the tunnel, in order to hold it up while we moved the crane around to the front of the car and pulled the engine out. Now, everything from the engine had been disconnected. The only thing that was holding the engine in basically was its bolts to the transmission and the two engine mounts to the chassis. So it came out really easy. You know, the body's off the car, you just hook up the chain to the hoist, and boom, it was out in like 10 minutes. Now, going back in, it's going to be a little bit different, because we're going to put it all back in as one assembly, and that's going to take a little bit more finesse, because we've got to maneuver it in without destroying the aluminum panels with the transmission and the tail shaft hanging off the back. However, that's the way that we're going to do it. We're not going to do it in two stages and try to get the transmission wedged in there and then mate the transmission to the engine in the car. It's just easier to put it all together out of the car and then kind of move it into place and then secure it. And actually, it's pretty easy with the 4-post lift. A lot of times what we'll do is we'll drop the front end of the car off the lift, leaving the back end of the car up on the lift, and we actually raise the back of the car, and then we slide the engine right in, And then with the bridge jack that we have for the lift, you can get that underneath the transmission and actually pull the back of the transmission up to guide the engine in the rest of the way. We've done it that way, I don't know, a dozen times now, and it's a piece of cake. Now this engine is gargantuan. It's huge in comparison. I had the LS engine that's going into Ellie sitting next to it back here in the shop the other day because I had to get the shop crane in next to the Mark III, and you can see the LS engine is sitting back where it has been sitting for the last few months. But since I needed that room to get the shop crane in, I had to move the LS out of the way, and so we had it sitting back here next to the 4.6 liter. It's amazing. This mod motor just makes that LS look like a toy. The funny thing is the LS has more horsepower, more torque, in a smaller package, and it's old technology. It's push rod engine versus the dual overhead cam. So I just thought it was kind of funny. I should have snapped a picture. If I need to move things around later and have the LS next to this one, I'll snap a picture and post it on the Facebook page so all you guys can see it. But it's amazing the difference in size. So the engine is out. We're going to, while it's out, we're going to put in the sensors and what have you that we're going to need for the gauge package. We're going to put in the sensors that we're going to need for the Holley terminator system and kind of get some of that stuff pre-wired. I don't want to put the harness on there just yet because Michael has said that he has some different valve covers and a new intake manifold that he wants to powder coat to put on the engine, and I just as soon put all that stuff on it before I run the engine harness wiring on top of there. We have done some other things on the car the last few days as well. We did start working on wiring right here at the front of the car. You can see we ran the rear harness out the front of the firewall along with the Holley main power distribution wires that actually feed power into the Holley terminator system. They are adamant in their instructions that those need to be run directly to the battery. It's my understanding that the battery acts as a like an RF filter for the Holley system. It absorbs any type of radio frequency or EMI interference that any of the sensors and ignition and stuff could put out by the engine, and the battery allows all those bad things to be absorbed, so the Holley doesn't ingest any of that into its power source. So we're going by their recommendations. We ran it all the way to the back of the car. It's going to be run, right to the battery terminals, and we hope that way we'll never have an issue with this. Also ran a number 4 battery cable to the back. This is a brand new number 4 battery cable. I know other people run bigger wires. We're going to actually run this to a distribution terminal right here on the firewall. I've got it over here in the driver's foot box or in the driver's compartment, so I'll show you what that looks like. We use these on almost all our cars with a rear mounted battery. So this is what it looks like. It's just a main lug, and then it's isolated by the plastic or the phenolic material that it's made out of. This will bolt to the firewall, and then the main battery cable will come onto here, and then all the distribution wires for the Ron Francis harness, which are these, the ones that go to the alternator, the starter, and what have you. These will all terminate on that terminal. And then the main starter wire will tie to that terminal and then run down to the starter. It just makes for a cleaner install, so you don't have all these wires just down on the starter, where in the past, if we've tried to do it that way, sometimes you start running out of room on that starter because the lug, the stud on the starter isn't that long, and so you start stacking a bunch of wires on there, a bunch of terminals, you run out of space pretty quickly. So we went ahead and strapped all of the wires running to the back through the tunnel, all except the battery cable at this point. So the Holley main power and the rear harness is all strapped through the tunnel here. We're going to actually work from the back for the battery cable, because I want to make sure that we've got the length we need coming all the way to the front before we cut and terminate and put a terminal on the end of that number 4 main battery cable. At the back of the car, the battery terminal is already terminated on this end, so you'll see there's already a spot for the battery cable to land onto the battery. These are the Holly wires. They're a little long. We'll cut those, put eyelets on those, and then the battery cables themselves, both the positive and the negative. The negative hasn't been run yet. They'll come under the car here, and then they'll all be strapped nice and neat down here. In the past, we've come out of the front side of the battery box and then made like a block off plate or a cover right here. And I just thought, since we had the space or the extra length of wire, we'd come to the back this time and see how well that worked out. There is going to be no main battery shut off switch on this car. This is primarily a street car. It's not going to be tracked, and millions of cars are on the road without emergency or main cutoff switches on them. So this is going to be run just as a regular street car. I did source a fuse. This is a maxi fuse holder. This is going to be for our cooling fan. We're going to put either a 40 or a 50 amp maxi fuse in here. And today I think we received in the mail a 50 amp relay for the cooling fan too. We've used the Tyco style in the past. The problem is no matter how we terminate the blades on those, they always seem to work loose. So we're using this one. This is a Bosch relay, and it actually has screwed like jaw terminals, and then it has spade connectors for the activation ground and the activation positive for the coil. And we've used these on a couple of cars. They seem to work really good. I haven't had a problem with any of the terminals failing. Where with the Tyco type relay, which is what the 5-pin relays that everybody's used to using or seeing, we've just had an issue with the 50 ampers. They have really big blades on them, and somehow they just always seem to have issues. So what I'm thinking about doing is this relay is going to mount somewhere like right in here, and then it'll be accessible by removing the cover on the top of the footbox if it ever needs to be serviced. The fuse right now I'm a little bit unsure of. What I'd like to do is I'd like to actually mount it coming through the fuse backing plate right here, but I'm not sure how that's going to work. So we may just put it up here next to the relay that we were going to put in. Other than that, I think one thing I can show you is I did make a bracket for the Holly system. It's kind of like a standoff bracket. So this is the bracket that I've made. It's going to mount right here in the car, and it puts the actual Holly system, which is going to mount on the face of it here, about 3 inches off the back face of the firewall. So what that'll do is it'll allow us to bring cabling behind here. Things like the main power for the alternator, the starter, and stuff like that we talked about landing on that terminal post. It'll allow us to get that behind the Holly system and out through the firewall, and kind of layer the wires, front to back or back to front, or however you want to describe it, so that we don't just have a cluster of wires that we end up just tie wrapping everything together at the end. I'd like to try to keep as much of this stuff separated by the type of function it is. So like try to keep all the Holly stuff separate from the chassis harness stuff and separate from the cooling fan stuff. And so therefore, if there ever has to be troubleshooting done on the car, and for instance, you're working on the cooling fan, you'll know the cooling fan, it's in this one spot over here, and all the Holley stuff is over here, and then all the Ron Francis chassis wiring stuff is behind that. And I just think it'll make it easier if the car ever needs to be worked on and any of the electrical needs to be troubleshot. We did pull the heater core out for the time being because I'd like to get some of this wiring in place, and since I was working on the Holley system, I didn't want to continue to cut myself on the elbow with the fins on the heater core, so I pulled that out. But we'll be working on the 2 boxes that were going to contain both the blower motor and the heater core in, as we talked about in the last video. Okay, so what we did, when I say we, Michael and myself, we started talking on the phone and through text on Tuesday, 2 days ago. Tuesday, I think. And we talked about the transmission and what the difficulties were going to be if we could not get the transmission out with the engine in, and what that would mean if, say, a clutch needed to be replaced in 4 or 5 years. And we kind of tossed the idea back and forth about, just breaking down and buying a new transmission, one that had a separate bell housing, so that in the event that a clutch needed to be replaced, we could disconnect the transmission from the bell housing, pull the drive shaft, slide the transmission back in the car, and then hopefully get the bell housing dropped down, change the clutch, and then put everything back in reverse. And in the process of pulling this transmission out, I thought it was home free. I got it loose from the engine, and I did what we normally do when we have a T5 behind a small block Ford. I pushed it back into the tunnel as far as it would go, and I rotated it. If you were standing behind the car, it would be clockwise. So the shifter basically is pointing towards the passenger side of the car. And then normally you can kind of pull the transmission forward and then drop it down and out of the car. The problem is with the integrated bell housing on this transmission that's was in the car, it doesn't allow you to push the transmission far enough back to rotate it to get the angle you need to get it down and out of the car. So once the transmission was out of the car, and I posted this on Facebook, it was like there's no turning back. We had to get the transmission out of the car because it needed to be serviced. And at that point, without even calling or texting Michael, I just pulled the engine. And so the first time he saw it was when he saw the post on social media. It was then that the discussion really got going, and yesterday we ordered a brand new Tremec TKX for the car, and a new bell housing, a new clutch. I think we ordered some clutch cables. We're going to get a firewall adjuster. I have a clutch quadrant here, which we were probably going to replace anyways because it still has the factory plastic one. And we're now doing a new transmission in this. So I'm not sure what we're going to do with the old transmission. It's really a good transmission other than the third gear synchros. But for now, it's probably just going to go back behind the shop, and we'll deal with it at a later date, determine what we're going to do with it. And we've got a brand new TKX ordered from Mike Forte at Forte's Parts Connection. Mike, great service. Appreciate all the work you did for us yesterday. Mike got that thing all set up and ready to ship yesterday, and I believe it went out today. So we should see that. It's probably going to be 5 to 7 days ground shipping, and we should have it sometime next week. So that ought to give us a good chance to get some of the wiring and stuff done in the cockpit area, maybe get the the box, the aluminum box that we're going to have for the heater blower motor completed by the time that we get the transmission, and then we should be ready to mate the transmission to the engine and then get that all put back in the car. So I know that was a lot to digest here, guys, and I know it seems to be an ongoing theme that the shop is always a wreck. It's normally not, but because of the way my normal work schedule goes, and this isn't my full-time gig, I do this on the side, and then the car builds have been going lately. I just haven't had time when I'm in the shop to put the tools away at the end of the day. So I've just kind of been coming in the shop working, and then working until I'm tired and going in the house and crashing. So I expect in the next few weeks that we'll be able to catch up a little bit and be able to keep the shop in a much more orderly fashion, and hopefully not have engines and transmissions and all those good things just lingering about the shop. Hopefully they will be back in the car where they belong, and we'll be able to, whoa, that was real close, and we'll be able to get back on track. So again, I want to thank you guys all for watching the videos. We really do appreciate it. We do have other projects that are going on in the shop simultaneously with this. They just don't seem to be getting the attention that Michael's car is getting, or Ed's car before this. We'll kind of delve into some of those things maybe in some upcoming videos, but the white truck, the F350, is one of those projects. We've got a bunch of things that we have ready to go as far as cool upgrades for that. We've got the 74 Maverick that is behind the shop. That's the one we refer to as Ellie. Ellie's getting the 6-liter LS that we talked about earlier in this video. And then, of course, there's always things to do on the Factory 5 Mark III Slytherin. Even though that car is essentially done, there's always things that we're working on that. We're still working on a really good tune for that. We've got it, a good street tune that works for it now, but we'd really like to concentrate on some of the upper RPM tuning on that and really see what we can really get out of that little 347 that's in it. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a great day.